Careful, we're about to be live. Don't talk about that. Don't talk about that. Okay, we are live. Oh, everyone. Okay, so John screwed up the live stream, but that's okay because I did it on Monday. So, and we are a forgiving and merciful channel. So we are restarting again. We have reconvened the experts. We convened them once, and the stream fell apart. And now we're reconvening again to find out what they think about Jordan Peterson. Where were we? What were we? I don't remember what we left off on.
Did anyone actually notice that I went off air?
What was that?
I'm not sure when we went off air. So.
Well, okay, so we were talking about...
We went off air like 30 seconds before we noticed.
Stream with Friended, and then we got into a little bit about just the Peterson coming out religion. Oh, okay, I remember where we left off. Peterson, the last thing that I said was Peterson was raised in the psychological educational tradition. So he was coming at religion from the totally opposite point of view, more as a scientist. And this is partially why a lot of atheists connect to it, because it's a lot more, it was rooted in psychology and science first. And then he started, wasn't like he was a Christian apologist who said, I'm now going to research psychology to see how it applies to religion. Came about the other way and somewhat organically. And anybody want to go?
Yeah, I think you got that exactly right.
I think that's an interesting topic. And we were talking about that, the utility of religion. So I'm curious to know if how do you pronounce your name? Trig?
Trygve.
Trig and Felix. Okay, how do you, I mean, what's your take on religion? Do you think it serves a purpose? Do you think it's no longer needed? What do you think?
My take?
Yes.
Oh, thanks. Okay, my take. So I think religion is I think the best way to describe this is some kind of language. It's a kind of language that has developed over probably several million years, if not billion years. I won't rule it out. That has gathered information about how to act in ways that work, and it's been encoded in different ways in different areas because, well, variations in language, variations in grammar. It's the same idea but expressed in slightly different ways. That's what I think. And the utility is obviously related to understanding the language correctly.
Yeah, that's fair. Phelan, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree. I haven't thought about it as a language, but that's actually a really interesting way to think about it. No, basically, I just agree in the sense that it has an almost obvious utility for social cohesion and psychological. How would you put this? Like existential security. So it has a lot of benefit to people, regardless, like for a few different reasons, regardless of your background. And I think the main reason for that is because that was essentially built into us, into our biology through evolution. And the fact that people like anti-theists just haven't seen that. This is the thing. This is what we were talking about before. You were saying that Jordan Peterson was stealing views from Sam Harris, essentially, basically drawing over the atheists, and that's where I sort of I'm completely baffled because you look at the new atheists today, and they're all about being anti-religion. So it's kind of strange that the majority of atheists seem to not agree with that sentiment. You know what I mean?
I have a question for you, Phalanx, related to what you just said. So what do you think, and this is for everybody too, anti-theists don't see what you see, even though you're an atheist, Adam's an atheist, and I'm thinking Trygva's an atheist.
I suppose I technically am, yeah.
You don't have to be. You can accept Jesus on this channel. If you want to become a Christian right now, feel free. But you said something really casually that anti-theists completely reject, which to me is just common sense. It's totally obvious. The sociological utility where it gives meaning to people's lives and social cohesion. Why do you think the anti-theist can't see that, is the question for everybody. Why do they struggle so much with they're supposedly they're Mr. and Mrs. Science, you know, they're totally gay for science, just like atheists are, and the science backs up the the social cohesion and the meaning that religion provides. So why do you think they can't see it? Anyone?
Yeah, well, that's the bizarre thing, right? Like that's what I'm talking about, because you'd assume that that's the first thing that they go to, that they'd listen to Jordan Peterson over someone like Sam Harris. But it's just that straight up, what was that, like, assuming the conclusion. So they already have the conclusion in their mind. That's the conclusion they want to reach, and they will reach it regardless of what the science tells them. Yeah, so it's like forming a theory and trying to prove that theory, as opposed to trying to disprove that theory. You know, it's like bad science.
Right. Ironically, it's anti-science.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's just something that happens casually because of psychological errors. I think Nietzsche actually has something really useful to say on it, which is why I had up this book. In the last portion of the book on ascetic ideals, Nietzsche ponders what the meaning behind them is, and his proposition is that it's something like, ultimately, the idea that truth is desirable, truth is valuable. And that's a really strong idea. It's very well emphasized, for example, in Christianity, where Jesus says that he is the truth, among other things. And I think that something like this is going on in the minds of the anti-theists. They are so devoted to the idea of truth that they cannot comprehend the idea of something that isn't strictly true having value.
So it's only empirically verifiable truth that they can see as actually true. So they won't deal with something like a metaphorical truth. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
What do you think about, one of the things about Jordan Peterson, and going back to that, and actually even in the atheist interest, is why is it that a lot of atheists are young men? I mean, actually, the average age of an atheist is around 33, and the average profile is a straight white male. And so I'm just wondering, and that's not the average age of people who are religious. That's actually a higher age. And they say that a lot of people come to religion later in life. It's an argument atheists don't like, but it's an argument that occurs. We had an example with Antony Flew becoming I guess he was a deist late in life. And so and Jordan Peterson tends to attract young men. Basically, the profile of people who like to follow him is basically younger and male and straight.
Well,
so it's exactly
on YouTube.
What's that?
With that?
We should specify on YouTube. It wasn't like that in his classes. If we listen to what he's actually saying, and apparently it's evening out in the lectures that he's doing worldwide now.
Oh, it's evening out. Okay. Well, I guess they also said, I guess more men are likely to watch YouTube or to be on YouTube. So maybe that's a part of it too.
That's probably a big part.
That makes sense. But I'd also argue that there's a potential reason for that incline in things just like atheism. It would probably be sort of like the activist mindset. So if you look at activists, like any activists, a lot of them are young people. A lot of them are from rich or middle income families. So it sort of makes sense, that's the sort of class that usually goes for more outside ideas,
totally.
I guess.
I mean, that's just organically, once you start getting past a certain age, your values shift in terms of like raising your family and things like that.
Yeah.
So also YouTube does gear towards young men completely, but also Jordan Peterson, how he was introduced into America, was a lot through not necessarily alt-right, but through like the misgendering and things like that, was through controversies with the SJW. So that would automatically draw like, and as Esther pointed out, he's pretty male. Like, he's not macho, but he's certainly not like wussy. It's not like touchy-feely, girly.
It is macho, but not in the way people would stereotypically think of it.
Right. Go ahead. So what do you mean? I agree, but go ahead.
I mean, he is macho in the kind of trained sense. He's disciplined. He is forthright in what he's saying. He tries to be clear in his words, which is absolutely something that people can aspire to, and it's something he's been aspiring to as well. So he's trying to embody the ideal of the hero, you might say, which is an ideal that applies to all people, but perhaps comes more naturally as something to admire in young men.
Yeah.
You know what's
totally.
interesting about Jordan Peterson, and I just listened to a video from him, and I thought it was fascinating. He actually he doesn't like his president. He doesn't like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, I should say, and so he doesn't like him. And he said one of the reasons he doesn't like him, he actually started calling him names in the video, was because Justin basically, he thinks that Justin, number one, is capitalizing on his father's name of the same name, and the father built himself in a self-built way. And number two, because he lined his cabinet apparently with about 25 women or half women, and so he didn't like that. He said that he's lining them with women instead of picking people based strictly on their qualifications. So I thought that was really interesting, and I'm, as the only female here in this group, I don't worry if it's not going to offend me, whatever you think. But what do you think of all that?
The reason is strictly mathematical. That's my thought on it, anyway. If you have pools of different size to choose from, and you choose a set amount of people from each group, the chances that you're going to have an equal amount of highly qualified people from both groups is very, very low.
Yeah, it's just an arbitrary, almost sexist thing to do. It really makes absolutely no sense. Like you said, just mathematically, it makes no sense. So, but it looks good in politics.
Right. I mean, one of the things that Jordan Peterson, he gets accused of being alt-right because he's got common sense. He kind of bristles at the SJW crowd in a way that most of us organically do, because they're loopy these days. When you see like the debate about like there's now men on the women's track team who are transitioning, and you look at them and you're like, that looks like a man to me. It's like he's kind of old guard in his not necessarily traditional in his male female, but at least more traditional than the college campuses. College campuses, he's like Mr. Alt-right, because the college campuses have just become SJW left wing, almost 150%.
Because he says no.
Yes,
I don't think that, in our college camp, I think we should point that out, because I think the media gives us a bad name on college campuses, thinking that everything's alt to the left, and there's so many leftists. But actually, I'll say with the student population, I have, at least at my school, and I'm in a private school, so maybe it's a little different, but I probably have half Republicans and half Democrats in all of my classes.
That's interesting.
It's probably how it depends on the field, though. If I look at my college where I'm studying right now, we have I'd say that it's probably about 90% lean left.
Hold on.
That's my estimation. And there are delegated student groups to the precise purpose of engaging in activism for the causes of the left wing ideologies. That is, there's nothing equivalent on the right side where I'm going. There are very few that I see and talk to, but there's a lot of left bias.
Yeah, I agree with Trig. Stephanie, are you business oriented? Is your college more business?
Yeah, sorry, my son just came to tell me he's going to go fishing in the lake across the street, and they spotted an 8-foot alligator, so I had to warn him.
So, wow, tell him no. Tell him.
Yeah,
no.
Joy living in Florida. Yeah, I'm in a business school, and actually that's a good point, because if you're in the colleges of arts and letters, or if you're in colleges of social sciences, it's much more liberal than in the business school in general. In fact, half the faculty are probably liberal and the other half are Republican. I mean, it's just really a very representative group of people, at least in our business school.
Yeah,
right.
We have journalism, we have teaching, and we have arts.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, just anecdotally, when I was in college, that's when that whole Women with the Y, SJW crowd was really starting to, when I was in college, the vocal left was starting to get, I was starting to get tripped out by them. And they sort of interacted with the crowds I hung around with, because we were like, kind of punk bohemian types. And they were at all the parties that I would go to. So I knew all these people. And back then they were about 1 to 3% of the population in general. Now they're about 15%, and they're all over Twitter, and they're all over the universities. It may be an illusion that they completely dominate the universities, but it doesn't seem like it if you look at some of the underlying stats. Like it's something like 70% liberal and stuff like that. So
yeah, I think it's helped the hive switch here. The hive switch. Okay. Something clicks in the minds that makes them act in that way that we recognize as social justice warrior. But it doesn't happen all the time. Most of the time, they're completely ordinary people.
I agree. I just want to say I agree with Craig on the idea that sometimes they're taking it too far. I tend to be liberal. I lean to the left on a lot of things, especially on the environment and education, and I'm fine with gay marriage and that kind of stuff. But it's like they're taking things too far. Right when you accept something, you say, okay, gay marriage is fine. Then they want to take it to the next step. Or if you say, I'm okay with. Actually, I'm not okay with this. One other thing is Kamala Harris, one of these senators, basically said that she wants to, she thinks that prostitution should be legal. I mean, they keep pushing the envelope to something worse and worse.
But that's part of the point. Identity politics is like a zero-sum game. Once you make the gain, and this is why even when you read the media nowadays, you read something like Daily Beast, and they're like, we need a black woman on Saturday Night Live. A black woman appears on Saturday Night Live. Now we need a black gay woman. Now we need that. It's like there's no identity politics never ends. It's never
like
disabled,
fat, ugly, etc., etc. She has to be disabled, fat, ugly, black, and everything.
Right. That's the new one coming. You fat women are fat is pretty. That's the next SJW crusade coming down the pike. It's just there's no end to identity politics. If that's how you're slicing things up, you always have to keep moving forward, in order to, like, this is again anecdotal, but there was 13 Reasons Why. Did any of you see that Netflix show? It was really funny because 25% of the cast, or 25% of the characters in the show, were gay, and like they had this gangbanger from the hood who was supposedly in a gang, and he's a Puerto Rican gang guy, and he's like, I'm gay, right? And you're like, oh, come on. Yeah, right. They're like, they're trying to make it, it's just they keep pushing it so that there's no end to it. That's how I see it. Anyways.
Yeah, it's an unnatural push.
I've heard from people that 5% of the population is gay. And so when you have 25% of the people on a show, that seems like a...
Right. It's more like 2%. 2% are actually gay. But like where I come from, 10% of my Facebook friends are gay, at least. So because, I grew up in a very liberal town. So there's more people are more inclined to either feel free to express it or whatever. But in general, the general population, it's 2%. But if you watch TV shows, you'd think it was 35%. You think half of it?
I didn't know it was 2%. I heard Jonathan Haidt said 5%. That's where I got that number.
Oh, you could be right. I've heard too. But
it's worth keeping in mind that whenever these things, we can't really tell for sure. It might look like 5% somewhere. It might look like 2% somewhere else. It might look like 35% somewhere again. We can't really tell. We can't tell when it's people who are actually feeling that way in a completely biological, instinctual way that have no control over, and when it's just people who feel like, hey, this is cool.
Right, where it's just like there's even like a social pressure. This is a cool thing to do.
Yeah.
So you can't tell the difference. That's worth keeping in mind.
I'll tell you a couple of interesting things. There's a guy at my school, and he wrote a book that's he's an atheist, and the book is something about 10 reasons or 10 ways to stop religion in your institution. And he's got like the steps that people can take if you want to get rid of religion, and he's actually doing a lot of them himself. And one of the things he said is he pointed out the demographic of atheists, and he said that they need to target the underrepresented. So he said atheists need to have open arms for people who are homosexuals, for example, to attract attention and to their cause. And so it's a good strategy. And so I think that that's one reason why some people leave Christianity purely because they've been discriminated or mistreated by Christians, and that could be what's one avenue for them to go to.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge one. If you listen to
well, that's most of the anti-theists you can talk to. If you can talk to them, they have a so like they kind of see Christianity as something like the devil because they were raised Christian and then found out it was all a lie or whatever, or they were they were abused by Christians or hated by the church or whatever. Yeah, it's like because I know a few people like that personally, and that's usually where it comes from for people.
That's my impression as well.
Yeah. I'd say that's usually where it comes from, but it's not all, obviously. Like myself, I was anti-theist even though I'd never been Christian. So,
yeah. Right, that tends to be more rare, or at least your emotional. The people who have a real dog in the fight, a lot of times they were raised fundamentalists, the real like hardcore anti-theists, and it's obviously there's some reaction and some real anger there. Some of it obviously would be justifiable.
Yeah, it's like they've taken it to a personal level though, and you can see that when they start chucking science out the window in favor of just hating this religion, because it's like they've been personally gutted by it, and they can do all they can do now is do everything in their power to take it down, to pull it down a notch, to make themselves feel like justified in their anger, which is just it's just stupid. It's so stupid. It's unbelievably. Anyway, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's irrational.
I think that's pretty interesting because I think a lot of people, what you all are saying here is we have two atheists here who agree that the anti-theist movement is something that should be distinguished from the atheist movement, and
Absolutely.
that you don't and that's just like friended Adam. He thinks the same exact thing. So it's kind of like just like some of us are saying, used to be a liberal, but now I'm moving towards the middle because social justice warriors are taking it too far, and it might be kind of a comparable when you say that the anti-theists are taking it too far for some of the atheists.
Yeah, but then again, you have people like me. I've actually never been an anti-theist. I've just talked to church officials and so on and tried to figure out what they thought. And ultimately, I didn't feel a need for any kind of strict religion in my life. So I just went on doing what I thought I should do, and that has worked remarkably well for me. But I suppose that makes me very different from your typical atheist, who will probably also be an anti-theist because of grievances.
Yeah, that's
so in Norway,
pretty
are there
strange.
a lot of what's the trends as far as atheism in Norway? Because I've looked in Sweden, I haven't looked into Norway. Trends go up.
It's pretty high.
Seems to be going up.
Yeah, it's like all the Scandinavian countries, right? They're all kind of similar. Mostly secular, sort of like Australia.
Yeah,
but still about 70% I think gets baptized.
Oh, okay. So wait, what's the percentage of atheists in Norway?
It's really unclear, but I can't say much more than about 70% get baptized, and I think probably something like 20% would be other religions. And
okay.
The remnant for atheists, I suppose.
Yeah, that's still pretty high. I would have thought.
There's some really remarkable crossings. For example, you have people who believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, but don't believe in God. So you don't really know what to make of that.
Yeah. Oh, that's
kind
of like Jordan Peterson. Peterson's he calls himself a Christian, but he's really like a cultural Christian. He's not the kind who, he's not even sure if Jesus resurrected, and that's to me the foundation of Christianity. If you don't believe that, I don't know how you can call yourself a Christian. But
well, to me that sort of makes sense. That sort of makes sense in the best way possible, in the sense that if it is his mission to sort of help people from the outside understand Christianity, he sort of has to take that sort of tact approach where, you know, maybe he knows, maybe he doesn't know. But he's also, like, I believe he's genuinely sincere about what he thinks. You know, he says all those things about, like, oh, it'd take me, you know, 40 hours to unpack whether or not Jesus literally was resurrected or whatever. And, like, I actually believe he believes that. It's just, it makes people, you know, I think on both sides, it makes people sort of cringe. Like I guess the Christians sort of think, well, why doesn't he just come out and say he's Christian? And then the atheists sort of think, like, you know, oh, why is he bothering with all this Christian crap?
Everybody thinks that's an easy question. He doesn't. That's why he surprises people.
He doesn't what?
He doesn't think it's an easy question. Everybody else seems to think so, but he doesn't, which really makes
sense. Yeah, totally. And it's like, it really doesn't have to be a question. Well, or rather, it's a question. It's just not an important one, and it's not an important answer, especially when it comes to his beliefs personally, and not just
I think it might be a very important answer, but not in the way that seems most intuitive. We have a lot of Christians who think that God is essentially the most important thing in the world, or in the world is probably the wrong way to put it, but something like that. That God is the most important thing. And it can tie this into morality. I suspect that people really fumble around when they use the word relativism. I think technically it's impossible to have anything objective without it also being relative. And I would argue that any Christian has some morality that's objective, but it's relative to God.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Just in terms of morality, yeah.
And,
well, I totally agree.
Okay, go on.
I totally agree with what Fallon said about if that's his mission to actually help reconcile people to the church who were like atheists or non-believers who had walked away from Christianity, especially because they thought it was unscientific or there was no scientific basis for faith and things like that, then where he's at in terms of his own personal belief system is almost ideal because he's non-committed on either side and it's authentic. It's not like a lot of people accuse him of being, saying of playing both sides of the coin, but I don't think he's doing that. I think he's legitimately saying where he's at, and it changes from day to day. I think it's real. I think that's where he doesn't, sometimes he probably thinks, okay, I could actually believe that Jesus rose from the dead every once in a while. And then other times he's like, no, that's just not possible. He's in between. And that's why he's really useful to people who are also not necessarily convinced.
Yeah, and at the same time, his mission isn't necessarily to make people reconcile with Christianity or the church. He has been very clear in his lectures from Toronto and also from Harvard about the central idea of rescuing your father, that would be culture, from the underworld, as what makes someone a real person, in quotation marks, I suppose. And I think that's what he's doing fundamentally. He's trying to help people rescue their father from the underworld. And for a lot of people, that's going to be Christianity.
Right. It's just an outfit.
It's going to be something else, but it's going to be based on it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, it's.
I think I want to do a call out to Chris, who's in the chat. So he's called Biblical History Skeptics, and say hi. And he wanted to point out that Norway is 29% atheists.
Oh, there we go. Cool.
That would be the people who aren't baptized, then, I guess.
What's up, Chris?
Yeah. Do they count baptized people as religious?
Christians tend to.
Well, yeah, that's fair. But I know some people who were baptized and they've never been religious. They've never even been raised religious, but they were still baptized. Yeah, so if they're just counting baptism, then that's a bit of a bizarre way to count religious people,
It also matters.
So
there are a lot of Catholics and Lutherans, for example, they're baptized when the babies are infants. And then when people get older in different churches, like the Baptist church, they wait till you're old enough to basically say yourself, Jesus is Lord.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that sort of makes more sense then. I don't see why you wouldn't do that all the time, but yeah, I don't know enough about it regardless. But
think about it in terms of ritual.
yeah, it makes more sense. I was gonna say something.
I'm gonna be right back.
What were you going to say?
So, sorry for the background noise. I just wanted to say that's a good point, Trygve. Like a lot of Christians will probably kind of get the assumption that Peterson is kind of trying to bring people back into the church. But it's funny, like if you watch like some of the different interviews and things that Peterson has done with people that actually have like converted into Christianity or came back to Christianity because of his lectures on the Bible and things like that, he always seems like so surprised at this. And I think you kind of make a good point how I think probably his mission is more along the lines of trying to get people to act out, I guess, the archetypal role of the hero, which maybe for him is kind of a deeper sort of history than just a religious like substructure that's kind of more on the top.
It's what gave rise to religion, actually.
It's what, sorry?
Say that again?
By his analysis, that archetype and its relationships to order and chaos is what gave rise to religion as we know it.
So what do you mean by that?
Good point. Like people have kind of stepped away from acting out the archetypes of mythology, and I guess maybe have a more nominalist approach to religion by I don't know. I guess just going to church once every Mass, once every Christmas or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is sort of seen by the new atheists as a way to convert people, but like you said, it's really. It's less about converting people, and it's more about bringing them to to the hero archetype or whatever, saving their father from the belly of the beast or from the underworld, whatever it is. Yeah. And for some people, that just happens to be Christianity or another religion. But obviously that's just seen as straight up conversion tactics by the new atheists.
And also by some Christians, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's the wrong way to look at it. It really is. Even though it might, be helping the Christian cause, so to speak. It's really just it's not what he's doing intentionally, and I don't think it's only in a superficial way that he might be actually converting people.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's more converting people to the ethic of Christianity, which we all have in us, regardless, or any sort of religious ethic, regardless of whether or not they actually call themselves Christian or not.
Paul, Felix, watched Paul Vanderklay's channel at all?
No, I've seen his interviews with a couple of people, but no, I don't actually watch his channel.
Okay, because there's a lot, because he does interviews with probably about 3 a week with people with their experience with Jordan Peterson, and it's all over the place. Some people actually did. It's not that Peterson himself is a goal is to reconnect people to Christianity, but that's winds up happening in a lot of cases because the science, he's giving them a reason to start going back to the faith that they were raised in. Let's say, you know what I'm saying.
And then you have the wonderful cycle of doing, belonging, and believing, which makes them more and more into Christians simply because they act it out.
Right.
Oh, who's this? Sorry.
That's Height. Through Durkheim through Height in The Righteous Mind.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I actually wanted to bring up, I think that's really interesting is the kind of like, I guess, differences between Peterson and Haidt in how they kind of look at religion. Where Peterson, it's kind of like from the, I guess, phenomenological or the subjective personal I guess, inner self, but like inner perspective on religion, I guess, kind of from the inside in a sort of way, whereas Haidt is kind of taking a more scientific, objective stance, like looking from the outside, like seeing how there are these benefits to religion and things like that, whereas Peterson is, I guess, looking at the psychology and the individualistic approach. Yeah.
I think it fundamentally starts from something like solipsism, where you can't be sure of anything, and then he builds on that, on the things you cannot deny, such as pain. I went in that with Esther in that discussion I had yesterday on Twitter.
Is that Esther O'Reilly?
Yeah, where I attempted to lay out what I think is the philosophical framework of Peterson, which he has built from as few assumptions as at all possible, it seems to me. And well, if you want to hear it, it's something like was it ontology or ontology? I don't remember. Anyway, it was Darwinian, let's say, ontology, and the epistemology comes from Bacon, I would say. If it allows us to do something new, it's new knowledge, even if we don't understand how it's new knowledge. And then this framework of knowledge that is attained through new function is used to validate neuroscience, which informs this idea of order and chaos as metaphysics, which it technically is, I would say.
You know, I just want to ask you, this is a side question, completely unrelated, but I'm curious. Do you know Rene, who goes by Renevelation?
I know, he reminds me of him too. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
It's the first thing I thought. What's that?
I feel like I've got his twin separated at birth.
Totally. It's the first thing I thought when he joined the stream. I was like, oh my gosh. I almost said it right first 5 minutes. I was like, wow, are you Renee's like cousin or something? Do you have a cousin in Germany, Trygve?
No, not that I know of.
You got to see, there's this guy, Renevelation. He's a friend of Stephanie and I. He's an atheist. And I swear to God, you remind me exactly of him. He's been on my channel a couple of times. I've interviewed him.
He's been on mine too. He's just like, and I was just on a debate with him on Modern Day Debate not too long ago, and he talks just like you. He looks like you. It's amazing.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's uncanny. If you close your eyes, it's the same person. You probably have relatives in Germany that you lost touch with over the years.
I wouldn't be surprised, seeing as it's pretty close on the global scale. And I believe the German people is part of the same group of peoples that gave rise to the Scandinavians, which is part of the idea that gave Hitler the idea of Aryans.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So it wouldn't be surprising if there's some kind of link, but I don't know about it.
Yeah, I'm actually part German and part Norwegian, and I do see a connection too between a lot of those Northern European countries. And
yeah, I'm half German, half Italian.
Well, that's funny. Yeah. So no, getting back to let's go back to your points there. So what else did you want to add to that? I kind of lost. I took us down a wrong path.
You mean the philosophical framework I think Peterson uses, which I think I use too. Okay, so Darwinian ontology. What is real is what selects. And what selects is an open category. We don't necessarily know what's in it, but it's what selects. It's a necessary consequence of having differences and interactions between the differences. And somehow, let's not say anything about how, because we don't necessarily know or understand. Somehow that's given rise to something like us that can sense and doubt and so on. And we don't understand everything. I think that's pretty clear. We get surprised constantly. So how can we be sure of anything in the existential uncertainty we're dealing with? Well, if it allows us to do something new, it has a function. So it's got something right, even if we don't know what exactly. It might just be luck. We can't tell. But if it lets do something new, there's no reason to assume it doesn't work. So you can think of it as pragmatic or Baconian, I guess, something like that. And that would be the epistemology. And then you get the metaphysics, which is influenced by neuroscience and how our brain seems to operate with known and unknown territory, which is not physical, but kind of inevitably related to what we understand, which is what our brain uses apparently.
So you're being a pragmatist, I would say, and you're saying that everything, I mean, is this what you're saying, if I'm rephrasing this right? Are you saying that everything we see on the Earth, maybe the planets, the stars, the solar system, the moon, the sun, all that kind of stuff, everything has a function? And if it didn't have a function, it would not be here? Is that what you're...
No. Epistemology is how you attain knowledge.
How you come to, yes.
So you gain knowledge through acting out things and identifying functions. As long as those function works, you have reason to think that you found something, even if you don't understand what or why it works. And that seems like a lot of necessity to me.
Okay, well now, so that, I actually got into a conversation with somebody earlier on that today, and we talked a little bit about how people come to knowledge. And one of the things that some people have proposed is that you're born with a blank slate. I would argue heavily against that, because I think you're born stacked. The deck is stacked when you're born with the certain predispositions that you inherited from your parents. So you actually have a lot of, about 50% of your personality, for example, can be predicted by your parents' personalities. And they've shown with studies of identical twins that nature really does matter. So it's nature over nurture in some cases. And so, but then beyond that, how you come to more information as you get older is through all your experiences. So your mind collects information as you age and get older. And with each experience, you learn a little bit and you shape your behaviors after that accordingly. And so, in some ways you're pretty rational, but in other ways people are irrational. But there's a lot of explanation for why people do what they do based on this history of experiences that they've had.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we lost Craig and
No.
Yeah. What you were saying, Trygve, it reminded me, I was having a conversation with Esther O'Reilly, a private message, talking about kind of that exact thing where we kind of like build frames of like how we explain the world based off of all of our experience and things like that. And we create these models for what reality is. And then what objects to those models is basically coming out of the unknown. Like what's... Yeah. The stuff that we don't know is what's going to, like Peterson puts it, reality is what objects to your stupid model. And so and if it's kind of like there's this category of the world which will just kind of label as unknown, and everything that gets put into what we do know is through the act of interacting with the unknown. It's kind of a core theme to Erich Neumann's book, the History and Origins of Consciousness.
Maybe that's where Peterson got from then.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, and there's kind of a way in which Neumann uses the unknown as like not interconnected, but interchangeable with the label of God. And so, like, what God is that which is outside of our realm of knowledge, what we're able to know at any given point in time. Because there's always going to be something outside of our realm of knowledge. And what's outside of our realm of knowledge is what's going to be changed, what is going to be, it's basically like randomness. Like Nassim Taleb, his book, Fooled by Randomness, kind of points out how what is random is all of our like risks that we take in the present kind of get stacked up inside of this unknown thing called randomness. And then boom, a black swan event occurs, which like kind of throws us for a loop, and if we don't prepare beforehand by not taking these types of risks, then we're more suited to be able to deal with these types of events that are outside of our ability to control or predict.
Yeah.
You know, I was listening to Jonathan Haidt makes a kind of similar argument as far as saying that kids in the olden days, like when I grew up and when Craig grew up, we were basically put out of the house at about 6 years old, told, go out and play, come back at dinner time. And we went out and, sometimes climbed trees, sometimes people broke arms, a lot of different things happened. And our parents gave us tons of freedoms and we made a lot of discoveries. And so by the time we were in our teens, at the age of 16, we all wanted to get a car right away on the day we turned 16. And these days, apparently, there's a lot of kids who aren't even trying to get driver's licenses until maybe 18 or 19 or even older. A lot of them because of video games and other reasons and being sheltered, essentially, and not really going out on their own until they're at least 12. They haven't been able to build up the knowledge of what's out there to be able to make informed decisions. And so that's a challenge that we have right now in this.
Where did you, is this from Haidt you're talking about?
That's from Haidt, yeah.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, kids are attached to their phone.
Right?
Yeah, I tweeted that actually. I've got the link to the video I watched. I watched it this morning. It's really good.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Have you guys read The Coddling of the American Mind?
Not
I
yet.
haven't yet.
Okay, because we were talking about oh yeah, good, excellent. We were talking about universities before and how the ideological stint of them is skewed one way or another. He goes through all of that, why that is, and why that changed from 5 to 10 years ago.
Yeah,
it's really interesting if you're interested in that sort of stuff. Including all of the anti-fragility stuff, like you were saying, the free-range kid sort of model of parenting, and that it's really worth a look. And it does. It's like a diagnosis of a lot of the problems we see today, especially on college, especially with activism, the SJW rise, all that sort of stuff. It fits so perfectly.
The quest for like safe space and things like that, is he relating that to what Stephanie just talked about? Kind of like, what is free range, not having free range kids? Is that what Stephanie was just referencing about? Like,
yes,
okay. So is he relating that to some of the snowflakes of the SJW movement, and that's why they're so precious? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, and he links back to studies showing that kids need to take risks and to have bad things happen to them. Like they need to know what it's like to deal with issues and problems on their own, and realize that those issues and problems aren't that big.
Right. Somewhat of a rough and tumble environment growing up is actually healthy for kids, especially.
Yeah, exactly.
Part of what play is you get hurt and you get knocked down, playing. We would go to play football after school every day, that's part of what it is.
Unless it kills you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what, and there was another conversation that said a lot of times in schools, the schoolyards right now prohibit kids, for example, from snowball fights. And I'm trying to remember if I heard that from him or I heard it from Sachs, but I heard it from one of them.
Yeah, that was in Leonard Sachs' interview just with Adam.
Okay, so that's where that was. So Sachs said, so he advised a school to actually set a safe space where people can fight with snowballs and stuff, to just let boys be boys, because boys have that desire to get out and do that kind of stuff. And when you prevent them, they start falling back in school.
Yeah, it's something really important that gets missed there. People, like kids do these things, rough play, whatever, snowball fights. Then one day someone gets hurt, the school gets sued, and the rules change. And it's just, it's absolutely absurd. But this is what happens. And a lot of it is just on the generation of parents at the time. But he makes that, you made the point there too, Craig. He makes that point that, kids are anti-fragile, which means that the more you knock them around, the more they get knocked around, the more that they actually grow stronger, as opposed to being fragile where they would break.
Right.
See, I'll tell you what I have in college is, and what I've seen quite frequently, is parents are getting very involved with their kids' grades and that kind of stuff. And I've actually had I had a couple of instances. One where an MBA student was failing out. He wasn't doing very well in school. His mom came down and wanted to sit down with me and talk about his performance in the classroom with him. And she basically was beating up on him in front of me. And I thought, oh my gosh, let this boy, I mean, he was probably 25 or 30, somewhere around there. And I thought, just let him, he's now past her. He's hopefully still maybe in the house or something, but that does not help people. And so, unfortunately, you just do see helicopter parents are a real problem.
Like, seriously, 25?
I'm serious. Because I hadn't had, that's, usually I don't see it. I usually see it at freshman and sophomore year, sometimes at junior year. But in this case, it really stuck out for me because I thought, this young man is still in the coattails of his mother.
Yeah,
that's absolutely insane.
That's the divine mother, eh?
That's not going to be good. That guy's there'll be a post office shot up someday. There'll be 15 people killed in a post office with his name at the end of it.
I gotta remember his name. I gotta think back to what his name is.
Yeah, well, you're soon enough. That's that guy whose mom told he's like,
and that's him. Yeah.
She's creating the next serial killer.
Oh no.
But you know what? Another thing that was brought up in some of these conversations is how society, like during the 60s, society had this huge sexual revolution. All these people were doing anything they wanted to do with each other, and there was all kinds of free love, they called it. And then in the 70s, it's like there was a wake-up call, and people said, wait a second, we don't like this. We want more conservative values. And then, so I'm wondering if what we're seeing now will be something that suddenly we have this shift back.
Well, they always say that there's the classic theory of the pendulum. And if you look at just by our politics, the Tea Party, for example, was a direct response to Obamacare and Obama taking office. So there's always counter movements and counter revolutionaries, and they always say the pendulum swings back and forth. Like the Reagan Revolution was a response to, the 60s and the Me generation and things like that. So.
One thing about that, it's definitely changed recently. Consider one thing: we have much better infrastructure for communication now. I think it's completely possible for the pendulum to split into two and swing independently of itself.
Well, that's okay. That's a great point, because that's one of the things that's going on now that's very new, is that you now have two sets of people, like liberals and conservatives in this country, for example, who are getting almost completely different. They're almost tuned into completely different news sources and getting completely different information.
This is what Scott Adams calls the country watching two different movies. Because it's essentially that, like, we have two concurrent, differing narratives that.
But hang on, it's not limited to two. It can be as many as necessary. There's no limit to how many pendulums they can split into. Now that infrastructure has gotten so good for communication, they can go in all directions at all times, basically in an instant. I mean, we're talking across the Atlantic Ocean, aren't we?
Yeah, that never fails to blow my mind. Yeah, Twitter, you talk to people from Germany, for example, in real time. You'll be having a conversation with Rene, your twin brother, and he's in Munich, or I forget where he is exactly, but he's somewhere in Germany while you're having the conversation. That always blows my mind. I'm having a conversation with people from all over the world in real time. That's definitely new, and that's going to affect things going forward, and nobody knows exactly how.
I think this pandemic is going to split basically an undeterminable number of times, and going to keep swinging, but it's going to split and not going to swing in relation to other parts of itself anymore.
So what's going to be the final outcome? Chaos, anarchy, punk rock revolution?
Unless you take personal responsibility, I would say.
What is it?
Unless people learn to take personal responsibility again, probably.
Wow. Phalanx, you heard it here first. What do you say?
I don't know. I don't know about that. The main reason is because I don't even know if I agree with the idea of that, pendulum swinging back and forth in the first place. I agree that we're becoming more fractured as a society. But just that pendulum analogy between like the left and the right, or conservative and liberal, I don't know, because if you look back throughout history, two things have happened for sure. The first one is that we've inevitably moved left, right? And that's happened over the past, 1,000 years, where with every Reformation, every, even now we're still introducing more and more left ideas. And the other thing that always happens is that there is a conservative movement, and conservative movements are reactive by nature,
Right?
reactive to the sort of not to the sort of like to the new ways of doing things at the time, right? So
Right.
conservatives move along with it's more like a push and pull. I wouldn't say it swings back and forth. You can sort of measure, the ways in which countries become more or less conservative and progressive, but I don't think it's so simple as swinging back and forth.
The overall,
Which is why I say it fractures, which is why I say it's no longer one pendulum, but it's splitting in several ones because we can communicate so quickly. It's now possible to get a limited picture of how things work and then react to that.
Yeah, but I don't even think that
he doesn't think
way back when it was a single pendulum is what I'm saying.
Oh,
he's saying
I'll
there's
say
a,
that application it's possible for it to be limited, and that's not being one pendulum. I think it's better to think of it as reaction counter reaction, which is essentially what the pendulum is meant to illustrate. And if it's not clear when talking about the pendulum splitting into two, that's a pendulum metaphor of breaking.
Yeah, I can understand that.
I kind of have to agree with Phalanx. There's video.
nobody can hear you, John.
We're losing you, John.
How society does tend to move further and further left as time progresses because technology allows for the lessenings of like hard and fast rules. So like in third world, say like tampons or any menstrual items aren't available. Or how
Not coming in very well.
Oh, sorry. Let me see. How about now? Is that all right? Is that?
Yeah.
Can you hear me all right? Or all right?
Yeah, just make that last point again.
Yeah. Can you hear me all right now?
I can hear you.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, great. Yeah. Okay. So the distributist, in one of his videos, he talks about how the increase of technology kind of frees people to have.
Then you.
I know what you mean to say, but I can't hear a thing anymore. If I think your point got lost in the robot again.
So
you, right?
Yeah, he's gone, I think. So Phalanx, what you're saying is the general trend is towards more progressivism and more liberalism, and as a general rule, conservatism is a reaction against that, and is trying to gird up the traditions of society as a bulwark against. That's definitely true. I'm just saying, I'm not sure the pendulum is really that specific. It's just that with each move forward, there's a push from the other direction. That's the only thing that the pendulum is really saying. It's like each movement has a counter movement. So that doesn't necessarily, it fits with the pendulum theory, sort of.
Yeah, but usually the pendulum swings, in this case, the pendulum swings further to one side than it goes in the reaction, because otherwise there wouldn't be a general movement to the left. That's the point he's making, I think.
It's interesting.
Yeah, that's essentially what I'm making. That's why I sort of visualize it as a tug of war almost. It's like one side's constantly stepping one way, but someone's like pulling them back the entire time. Yeah, and it's always for different reasons, and there's always different things being proposed and moving forward and progressing. But you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of what you're saying.
Oh, that's good. Thank God. No, it's interesting though. And I think that's something that people don't really understand. And that sort of brings us back to the righteous mind and moral foundations theory. I think you guys started talking about it. Where conservatives, essentially understand things in a more broad spectrum, and because liberals and progressives have such a narrow understanding of what of morality, they sort of just see conservatives as evil,
The idea of moral capital is really valuable, I think.
Moral what? Sorry?
From Righteous Mind. I believe it's the last part of the book.
I haven't read his book yet. I got to get that. I've been reading academic papers by him.
Yeah. The idea of moral capital is really the equivalent of social capital, except for morals.
Social capital is another word to say trust, just so people know.
Yeah. And he talks about moral capital, which is. Does he claim that it's more important than social capital? I can't remember.
No, he claims that conservatives understand it better.
Better with their moral capital, you mean?
It's interesting. You guys, I'm going to have to run because these kids, they're all outside and they keep doing crazy things over here. And I just saw 4 of them with fishing poles walking across the street to go to the lake that has the 8-foot alligator. So I got to go at least warn them about this alligator. So I'm going to let you guys go. It's really nice talking to everybody.
All right, no worries. Catch you later.
Yeah.
They're anti-fragile.
Yeah, get super anti-fragile from getting eaten by an alligator.
Yeah, let them play with the alligator. What are you on about?
I think anti-fragility is one of the things Nietzsche really got right with his ancient statement about what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. That's essentially the idea of anti-fragile as rediscovered about 200 years later, after all.
Yeah, it's something that people keep forgetting. That's the main point in The Coddling of the American Mind, is he comes up with these 3 great untruths, which we are consciously or subconsciously teaching our children. You might have heard of them, but the first one is literally.
His first book?
Sorry?
I think they came from his first book. I haven't read it, but he mentioned them also in Righteous Mind. So I think they come from his first book. Yeah,
I think they do. I think he just formalized them in this latest book. But it comes from that first point was the first great untruth was what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. And you can totally see that in universities today, in whatever, because that's sort of how people act. Something bad something goes wrong, something negatively affects someone, and they freak out it's going to make them weaker.
But then we sort of have the reverse if you look at Christianity. I mean, what happened with Jesus Christ according to the story? I believe he got killed and that made him stronger.
Well, I guess so. I haven't actually, I don't know much about that sort of story, but I think generally the ethic of Christianity is understanding that from trials and tribulations you learn and grow.
Yeah.
That seems like a big part of it to me. And the fact that isn't being emphasized is sort of unsettling,
We need Nietzsche to replace it.
Yeah, bring back Nietzsche. Yeah, but then all the edgy kids in the schools will come back and go, "Oh, Nietzsche, he's the one that said God God is dead. Hooray!"
Yeah. And we have killed him.
Yeah, that's nuts. How accurate that was.
It's a really interesting statement, though.
Yeah. Well, do you have something to say on it?
All right. So I'm back from driving. So whenever you need to leave, Craig, I can take over for you. But yeah. So, something with height, I think it's very interesting. Like I kind of see it as like each moral foundation is kind of like a different sense, kind of like a sense of touch, a sense of taste, a sense of seeing things, kind of like that. And each is kind of useful depending upon whatever environment you're currently in. So like if you're in a movie theater, then you're going to be highly focusing on your sense of sight, whereas, or if you're in an environment where, say, there's alligators out there in the wild, there's a much further need for to have the worries for children, like have that care harm principle kind of heightened to a good degree.
Yeah, so you reckon they're like senses that change depending on your environment?
Yeah, I think so, because I think also like with there's probably a good deal of self-selection as well, but in larger cities with a denser population, the people there tend to be a lot more liberal. I think a large part of that is due to how many like new types of people, and probably like tying to the big five of openness. So like people that are more open to experiencing new and novel people and ideas and things like that are going to be moving to cities. But also, if you're like born into cities where you're always interacting with new types of people and things like that, you're going to be kind of more acclimated to these all these new things happening at once. Whereas if you're in a very like homogenous society or something like that, then you might be more conservative in your temperament, possibly.
Yeah. Yeah.
That seems to be the case anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's. I'll just pose this question to both of you, but I probably know where you stand. Like, how much of morality, in terms of the six foundations, how much do you reckon comes from genetics, and how much comes from socialization? Do you reckon?
I think that's a wrong question.
Well, what makes you say that?
Well, I think I'm very inclined to think of it in the same way that Peterson does, which is to say that we have instincts. Those instincts drive action initially. Then memory categorizes which actions led to desired outcomes, in what context, and so on, and brings that up and attempts to imitate that the next time around. And then that is abstracted, and in this sense, you might think that the idea of what to be valued could be completely instinctive, but the way that is valued would be socialized.
So this kind of goes into what both Haidt and Peterson kind of talks about, how we live inside of a story. And this story is either from our culture or from our religion or our politics, anything like that. Like Haidt has this TED Talk, like the two different stories or narratives of capitalism versus socialism.
Yeah.
And he tells the same exact story with the same facts, but an emphasis on different aspects of the facts, and also like painting the capitalists as the bad guys in certain societies and things like that. And yeah, so I guess it could be that the like story of the culture that you live within highly influences how you're going to be reacting to the things within your society. So maybe like similar to how Peterson talks about how fear is a sort of learned behavior to some things. Like a young child that sees a mouse run across the room will look to the mother to see how they react to the mouse, and then emulate that. But there's also the inbuilt fears, like Charles Darwin playing around with the cobras in the snake pit. Like every time it jumps at him, he flinches automatically. And also there's like I think an instinctive fear of like teeth and blood, things like that, even in like young children where it wasn't socialized.
Yeah, and that would be related to disgust in Haidt's framework.
Yeah, possibly. I don't know. It's interesting because there's kind of like the big five, which is like your personality and temperament. But yeah, I guess it could be. I don't know. It seems kind of more like in line with fear. So yeah, I guess fear a lot of times is or disgust is kind of sometimes aligned with fear, but I don't know.
I think they overlap sometimes, but they're very distinct things that are adapted for different reasons. Disgust would be something like, this should be far away from me. I want this gone. Something like that.
Yeah,
and fear would be, this could kill me.
Yeah, I reckon fear and disgust go hand in hand in the sense that disgust can feed fear and vice versa. But they're totally not the same. And you can just sort of see that, like they're almost. I'm just gonna go back to height, but they're almost like two different feeders for two different moral foundations. Like disgust is purely sanctity degradation, pretty much, and fear comes from the care
probably
harm
care and harm. Yeah. Because
yeah.
that's what I was thinking. Like, there's a lot of times where liberals kind of misunderstand what xenophobia is in conservatives, and they presume they presume that the reason people don't like foreigners is due to them being afraid of them, and like certainly that's the case in certain occasions, but a lot of the times, like Peterson brings up with Hitler a lot, it's more because of the disgust kind of foundation.
Yeah, it's the same
way. Purity, even.
Yeah,
so that might be an even better way to think about it. Something is pure, we want the pure. We don't want disgusting. We don't want things that are unpure. Which is also the same as behind finding good horses in horse breeding.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. But that's the sort of thing. I think you're right on the money there, John, because you have the liberals who don't like, because it's been proven that liberals and progressives don't understand so many of the moral foundations. One of them being sanctity and degradation. So it makes sense that they see, the disgust factor, or just the degradation factor when it comes to xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, whatever, and immediately attribute that to the care harm foundation. They'd be going like, "Oh, why are you scared of them? What's wrong with you?" Yeah, like,
but at the same time, they also recognize it in themselves. They just don't understand it as something separate. If you, as I believe Haidt demonstrates in Righteous Mind, if you just imagine, instead of a statue of Jesus Christ or Mother Mary or something like that is made of manure, you take a statue of Martin Luther King or something like that, and you see how people react.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think like the reaction is still there. They still have the capacity to. Sorry.
They just don't understand it.
Yeah, they just don't understand it, and they don't understand it when it's not themselves, if that makes sense. So when they see, well, and that makes particular sense in accordance to studies been done on it, where when asked to rate conservatives, liberals often completely mischaracterize them in so many ways.
Yeah. But I think I specify even more. Let's not say not themselves, but let's say not the in-group.
Well, yeah, not the in-group, because as soon as it goes to the out-group, in any case, liberals against conservatives or libertarians, for instance. Yeah. They like, it's that tribal sort of.
Yeah, it's a good point. Like, it's. There's kind of the universal empathy towards all within kind of the more liberal mentality. But anytime there's somebody that is, say, bigoted or something like that, that kind of instantly puts them in the out group. And so they're no longer to be considered morally, or at least not nearly as much as those within the in group. And that's kind of the thing. Like, they don't realize that they still have the same in-group and out-group mentality, but it's just their out-group is anyone that has a more, I don't know, I guess nationalistic leaning, or somebody that is not sharing exactly in the same mentality.
Let's say someone who says no to anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, yeah. Someone who doesn't just follow along, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Well, which is bizarre again because they don't like authority as well. So it's almost like their authority comes from, I wouldn't say grassroots, but like comes from just groups essentially. Well, instincts and more like the authority that a liberal group puts out is like social pressure more than anything.
Yeah.
So top-down leadership and authority is like, you know, it's sacrilege essentially.
Yeah,
Have you
that's
been
true.
watching anything from Aiden Paladin?
Sorry?
Have you been watching anything from Aiden Paladin here on YouTube?
I used to.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Recently she made videos on right-wing authoritarianism, and it occurs to me that this might be why left-wing authoritarianism is so hard to identify, outside, of course, of scales that people don't want to use, such as right-wing authoritarianism scale, which also identifies left-wing, surprisingly enough. But anyway, it seems to me that the difference might simply be that they don't see the leaders, they see the group. In the sense that we've been talking about right now, group pressure is authority.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a different sort of like I said, different sort of totalitarian or authoritarian structure. It's like right wing. It's almost very easy to see that it's just like, you know, it's like you've got a dictator. Left wing, that doesn't happen so much. Yeah, it's like the dictator is the people subjugating other people. Yeah, which is bizarre, really. It's kind of hard to understand, especially just because we think of dictatorships and totalitarianism as control from the top down. It's like an extreme form of
you listen to the Gulag Archipelago or something, and you realize this was bottom up.
The Gulag Archipelago, did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What was it? Was it so bottom? Well, it sort of was, wasn't it? The revolution against the Tsars. Yeah.
Not only that, we're also talking about group pressure keeping people from speaking up.
Right. Yeah. Because that's sort of the whole idea, isn't it? Is that that particularly is him talking about his own responsibility in it. Yeah.
Yeah, among other things, he's also analyzing other people. Remember?
Oh. Yeah, it's pretty crazy, and the fact that I guess that's one way that the left has been able to infiltrate so much at the moment. Because if you think about it, if you go up to someone and say, "Look, in what way is the left controlling you?" and they go, "Oh, I don't know, none," because there's no real like tangible, I don't know, like dictator sort of figure that they can point to and go, look at that, you know. Whereas on the right, I guess there is more, you know, or the conservative. You can just point to Trump and go, look, that's conservatism, that's evil, you know.
Yeah, that's good.
In the Soviet Union, I don't think you can even really point to Stalin. It seems to me there was a system around it that enabled that kind of person to come to the top and wouldn't allow anyone else to come to the top. So it wasn't really him; it was just whoever got that position.
Yeah, exactly, and
but yeah, that's
like you were saying before.
Yeah, like how by having kind of liberalism like where each like the maximal amount of autonomy for each individual, it's very hard to like argue against that, especially in kind of a Western society that's built upon that as kind of a core foundation. And so anytime, yeah, it's very hard to like point at a specific enemy or anything like that, especially with like when the like common criticism, I guess, of Peterson during the C-16 debacle was like, can't you just show respect towards people by like speaking to them according to how they want to be treated? Like it's kind of a really hard principle to argue against.
Yeah, and his answer was something like not by force of law.
Yeah, exactly.
And It's less tangible. That's the main thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fourth place is in your heads, as you said in that debate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of interesting because I was thinking about like what Adam talks about with the social utility of religion is due to like one aspect is how there's kind of the invisible cop on the beat, where people that believe that they're being watched are more likely to behave more ethically, or at least the ethics that they hold for themselves, essentially. Whereas if say like in communist Russia, there is an actual literal invisible cop in the beat, and every single person that you know, like 1/3 of the people around you are like spies, and so there's this necessity for actually behaving in according to the ethics of your society at that time, and without any of that, I guess, freedom to work upon. Without, I guess, the freedom to choose between doing good or doing wrong.
Well, to live by your own ethic, it suddenly becomes the choice is taken away from you. That's what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a gradual process. I think this is why liberalism in the USA has had this tendency to lean more and more towards agreeableness. I believe there's been a lot of talk about that recently in psychological circles. Not that I'm an expert, but there seems to be a clear tendency towards agreeableness becoming more and more prevalent in the liberal left. I prefer to call them progressives, but anyway. And this tendency seems to be something like simply because it's so hard to argue against the fundamental proposal that people should have as much freedom as possible. It's so hard to argue against it, so people just go along and they stop thinking. And suddenly they have agreed to everything, and they get more and more accustomed to it, and people who are agreeable adapt to that milieu more naturally than do elsewhere. And suddenly you have a group that is going to strike down on anyone who suggests that they might be wrong about something.
Yeah, you're right about it being gradual. Totally agree with that. It's and that makes it more insidious in a way. Because if it is gradual, well, actually, I take it back. It's not. It's that. I don't think that's unique to the left. I think any sort of.
I think it's all order, actually, but it might be more easily happening to the liberal left because of that proposal.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. Especially right now, that's what's happening.
Have either of you guys read Skin in the Game?
Yep.
No.
Okay. Well, in it, Nassim Taleb talks about this like principle called minority rule, where if like his example was in a population where only a small minority of people, let's say 10%, can only eat like a certain type of food, or in his case, he was talking about how Jewish people have their kosher laws for drinks, and so in a population where the rest of the 90% can either take it or leave it, like they can either have kosher lemonade or non-kosher lemonade, it doesn't really matter. But the 10% that are the Jews that can only have the kosher lemonade, that it kind of incentivizes the lemonade companies to only make the kosher lemonade, because like if they were to make it non-kosher, then they would only be able to take on 90% of people. But with it being kosher, the whole 100% of people can happen. So I wonder, I don't know, this might be quite a stretch, but thinking about how if the moral foundations of the left are only, say, the two, like care harm and equality, and they have kind of and if they're unwilling to use any of the other moral foundations, perhaps. And whereas on the right, there is still the care harm foundation as well as the equality kind of foundation, just kind of moderated between the other five or the other four. I wonder if they'll play along essentially for most disagreements on value, because they still, I guess, resort to that easy care harm kind of utilitarian kind of measurement for what's right and what's wrong.
Well, guess they don't see it won, right?
What was that?
I was just saying that's why Trump won, right?
Well,
in part, in that he would speak to
moral
foundations.
Yeah, that's true, and also there's kind of like building up problems, like problems that are arising within a good deal of the population that were not being addressed by a lot of people, and so there's kind of this, I guess, mentality of trying to get whoever is, I guess, kind of outside the party system, just because they were discontent with what the political system was. One I guess interpretation.
But I think you're absolutely right on that. Like conservative politicians and people in general have an advantage in terms of talking to people's morality, and that's just because if they use all 6 foundations, then they're talking to everyone. Like you said, the same thing, like with the kosher lemonade, they're talking to 100% as opposed to 90%.
Well, it's funny because it's kind of, sorry.
There's a catch.
Go ahead.
And the catch is if you speak to some orphanages that some people don't see any need for, they might respond by thinking, "What's the point?" And that might be someone else who focuses more on the things that they actually care about. Because if you talk about a lot of different things, you're going to put less attention on what certain people might think matters most. And that's a big risk if you talk to all the moral nations.
Well, there is that as well. I think especially in terms of politics, but I think it's possible to speak to enough moral foundations in different circumstances that you can sort of draw in from both crowds without missing any sort of ideological group, if that makes sense. Well, not any, but the ones that count, the main ones.
It'll be a matter of identifying the crowd and reading the crowd, as they say.
Yeah, that too.
It's almost like all of the non-primary moral foundations. Like, let's say the primary ones are liberty, equality, and care harm. Since those are kind of shared by all of the different groups, essentially, somewhat. It's like those kind of are put up as primary, whereas the other foundations have kind of been moved over into people's personal aspects of life. So like a person's religion is kind of their own personal thing, like what they consider sacred. The state isn't going to impose on that, and I'm not going to impose on that either. And like even just like looking at somebody like Ben Shapiro, who's pretty much a libertarian, while still holding his more conservative viewpoints, he's kind of conceded to the primary moral foundations, even though he, as an Orthodox Jew, holds to, let's say, the full range. He's kind of conceded the minority rule of like my freedom stops where it comes to, it's going to harm somebody else.
Where yours ends. Yeah,
exactly.
You might want to ask why exactly is it that those are the foundations that have become primary? As a suggestion, it might be because they're the ones that are easiest to defend rationally.
Yeah, I think so. I see it as kind of like it's a metaphorical framework that is widely applicable. That it kind of like it's much easier to I guess like consider everything in regards to whether it brings pain or it doesn't, or if it brings pleasure or something like that. And so it's like a simple binary kind of axis where if you can describe, say, like gun violence in regards to how it's affecting, like it's killing a certain amount of people and
hurting people.
And so it's kind of an easy way to explain moral issues in a way that everybody can understand, even like little kids. Whereas if you're talking about like property rights and different things like that, or like the age of when a person becomes a human being, these are things that are much more, I guess, abstract and kind of outside of our intuitive basis, where we can just like, oh, think about it, oh, pain and pleasure, or something as simple as that.
Yeah, it's a lot more tangible. The care, harm, and fairness are much more tangible foundations.
Yeah, definitely.
But then you also mentioned equality.
Yeah. And that's something that's definitely kind of built more off of, I guess, certain religious notions, because like in the more ancient worlds where there was, I guess, slavery was more of a norm, there was kind of, I guess that wasn't part of their intuitive framework. But from, let's say, at least one example is in Christianity. Like there's the point brought up by Paul, like there is neither Jew nor Gentile, master nor slave, male nor female. All are children of God and members of the body of Christ. That's like how. So that's sort of like a emergent moral framework that kind of came out of that into purely secular society, which like all for the better. But it's very interesting to see how this is kind of a axiom that is adopted within like humanist circles and things like that, without much of a rational basis behind it. But it's kind of just an automatic given because it's within our intuitive framework.
And then we suddenly have people who I think are confusing ought and is when it comes to equality.
Confusing
what?
Confusing ought and is regarding equality of humans.
Oh, yeah. So like, oh, I see. So under a moral framework, we were saying like it ought to be the case that like I'm going to treat you as if we are equals, but that's not to say that we biologically are equals.
It's not to say that we're equal in any other way except perhaps the one that matters most, whatever that may be.
So yeah, I guess if you're trying to build a biological basis for equality, then you're going to kind of get to have a hard time, especially with there being like biological differences between men and women, and just in bone structure and musculature and things like that. Yeah. It's kind of better when you have some sort of abstract humanness that is just kind of what makes us equal, rather than basing kind of a materialist framework for why people are equal just because they are human. I don't know.
Yeah, it is difficult to come up with a biological basis for equality. I guess in some ways it helps with the free ride problem.
I think there is one though.
I was just saying.
Go ahead.
Go on. No, go on. No. That's all right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I think there is a case to be made for some kind of equality when it comes to the biological basis. Though it's not strictly biological, it's more, let's say, empirical. Because let's face it, biology is smaller than the empirical. So
with their, sorry, go ahead and explain.
Case is something like this: all humans are capable of moving between groups and going outside of groups, and this is what makes us valuable. Because it means that every single one of us is capable of updating the group.
That's interesting, because like there's kind of the meme spread by vegans of like in any of these types of debates of trying to like name the trait that humans have that no other animal has that makes them special, like to only be held in moral regard, rather than like holding all animals due to their ability to feel pain.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to move between groups as a like sort of biological basis for what makes humans unique. It's interesting. I'll have to think about that.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. I think that's about the strongest case you can make.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's interesting. It is interesting. It's almost okay. Maybe I won't go that far. I was gonna say it's almost what makes us human.
Yeah, it's
I'd say that.
Yeah.
I got it from Peterson, I think, though he doesn't say it like that. I got it from Maps of Meaning.
Maps of Meaning. Yeah, I still haven't read that. Is that worth reading?
If you can handle the academic language, yes. It took me half a year, but it was so worth it.
Yeah.
Every single assignment since.
It's really helpful also like listening to the audiobook as well because like I read it while also listening to him narrate it and that helped in just being able to get through it kind of at a quicker pace. But
just like I love audiobooks.
yeah.
You know, I haven't been reading properly in a long time. And audiobooks just help me get through books. You know, and I re-listen to them if I need to, but because I have the time. But yeah, no. I think I'll have to get that one at some point. I still haven't.
It's a big project, though. Be clear about that.
Yeah. It really seems like it. Yeah. Well, I'm reading Basic Economics at the moment, so.
By Thomas Sowell.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm planning on reading that pretty soon.
It's good. It's worth it. It's and it is basic, even though it's not at the same time.
Cool.
What I've understood, economics is never really basic, is it? Because it has to do with the reflexive behavior of humans, where everything can impact everything else to an undeterminable degree.
Yeah. So basic economics really means not that basic. it is complex. But yeah, no, the book, it takes it through very basic principles and sort of extrapolates from there. It's really, it makes it easy. Yeah.
What do you think about this? I've been trying to classify different kinds of scientific investigation in my own way by what I've read, picked up from Peterson and so on. I think it's reasonable to think of a lot of the human-oriented fields as alchemical, as in they're trying to find solutions that work, and they're just sticking to that without really understanding how or why. I think economics is one of those fields, for example, and also medicine.
Yeah, medicine.
But I'll also say that as they develop, they move away from that increasingly.
Wait, you reckon medicine's also one of those fields?
Yeah, initially, but the more chemical it gets, the less like that it is. But even when it comes to chemicals in humans, we must consider that our thoughts are actually chemical and impact how they work.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
So it's really, really complicated.
Jeez.
So I think it's reasonable to think about the alchemical fields and the rule-oriented fields who have established rules and try to work with those rules to predict things.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's the thing with humans, though. They're, I don't know. From reading Dostoevsky, he has this line something about like even if you were to show how a human's actions were completely predicted all the way into the future, they would just like destroy the machine that could do that just in order to prove that there's something different from being a mechanical machine.
And even then, it's so predictable.
Yeah. You can predict that they're going to smash the machine in frustration.
They do that in the Matrix, you know. Matrix movie number 2, Reloaded. That's a big point to the architect.
Yeah,
that's true.
All right. Well, it's hit 10 o'clock here. I might have to just jump out now. But yeah.
It's 1:00 here.
Okay. Hey, we're in the future. It's 10 a.m. here.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I just logged in. I'm guessing like Craig is completely off, but I signed in using his account, so I can stop the broadcast. Thank you both for joining in, and thanks again to Craig and also to Stephanie. If you guys want to do a shout out or for anything, you're welcome to it.
Well, follow me on Twitter.
You're free to follow me on Twitter as well, though I'm not very active. Sometimes I am active, but you can't predict it.
Yeah.
Right.
What's your exact Twitter name? Okay.
Curious Entity.
Oh yeah,
Entity.
Curious. Yeah.
It's something to
right.
I see. Yeah, the word curious and then NTT. Curious NTT. And then for Phalanx, that's FALINKS. Is that correct?
FALEINKS. Yeah.
Okay.
I believe it's on the screen when it talks, so you can just talk and you can write from that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's true. It's right there. All right. Yeah. Thanks everybody for showing up, and anybody who was watching. Thank you very much. And we closing off for now.